Hi everybody, welcome to this week's video here on the beauty of pastel. My name is Bethany and today I am painting for you a beautiful meadow scene where I'm using a monochromatic pink alcohol wash underpainting. This was such a fun kind of experiment with using different colors in my underpainting. I loved the process and I loved the finished result. Let's get started. Back to my favorite UArt Grit 500. This is a piece of paper that I cut off of the roll, and I want to paint this scene a little bit more of a standard size than what it's cut in. So I'm just measuring to make sure my paper was wide at 12 inches and then marked a little mark to make a 9-inch height. And that way I can just kind of stay within those parameters. If you are cutting your paper off of a roll, I've actually gotten some questions before that does the paper curl more when it comes off a roll? And I find that it actually does curl a little bit more. Usually that's not a problem. I just tape it down securely and then of course store my paintings flat in a flat palette booklet that just keeps the paper flat. And then of course framing, matting, mounting, even taping your painting on top of a piece of mat board will take care of that issue. So usually it's not that big a deal. Using my graphite pencil, I am sketching in my major shapes. This scene was from a beautiful area in East Texas. I was actually at a standstill on a highway and took this photo out the side. It was more beautiful in person than the photograph implies. Of course, that's often the case. We take a picture of something that is really stunning, and photographs just can't capture how beautiful things are. So I wanted to increase the drama with this piece. Of course, exaggerate the height of the trees or just really kind of zoom in more to this field and sketch in that large tree on the left, and then as the trees go off in the distance, they get slightly smaller. Just kind of a beautiful field with flowers and grasses. You'll notice that I'm underpainting with a little bit of different color than my normal dark blue. I decided I wanted this whole scene to be really warm, and so I'm using, just in this first pass of my underpainting, a dark fuchsia new pastel. This right here is a Rembrandt orange, and then I'm also going to put some pink in the sky. I wanted to just kind of create an analogous underpainting full of warmth and just pretty bright colors. Washing it in with some rubbing alcohol. Of course, this is the same process that I use for many of my paintings. Usually I start in kind of the darkest areas first, whisking this alcohol into the paper. And you can kind of switch back and forth depending on how much of the pastel you want to move around. You can switch back and forth between brushes. I like to use both a flat I'm thinking about the shapes that I drew with my graphite earlier, and I'm kind of just coloring those shapes in here. I'm not really trying to be very careful in this process. I'm not being too precious about this underpainting. It's just a masked value and color shape. That's the only thing that I really try to get a good values in early on. And also color wise, I'm trying to make a good color tone for the base of this paper. applied a little bit of more of the pink, the dark fuchsia new pastel, and I'm whisking it in once more. Now, I often will do 2 or 3 passes of rubbing alcohol to get the proper values exactly how I want them. So I will apply my new pastel or my hard pastel, and then I'll go back in with rubbing alcohol, and then I'll go back in again. So right now I'm about to use my blue new pastel in the same way, and I will also be washing this in over the pink. I tried to stay away from the the blue new pastel, and I just couldn't. But I kind of was experimenting here since it is a pink undertone right now. Putting this blue and then washing it in, it's going to create a really beautiful purple. And I love to create a deep shadow at the base of a tree, and this color and this method is the best way that I have found to achieve the results that I want to have. I'm using a really light touch here because I do not want to push too hard and negate all of this underpainting, nor do I want to take up too much of the tooth of this paper. Of course, 500 grit is kind of the mid range for the UArt types of grit, and so it can take quite a few layers. Okay, so the paper dried, the magic of video. Of course, it only takes about 5 minutes for it to dry, and I'm just going to start applying just a softer pastel, although this is still a new pastel. I like to leave a little bit of what I would call just transparency in the work. I have that little strip at the top, which is if you cut your paper like this and you leave a little extra, that's a great place for you to test your colors in that bare area to see if you've picked something that you like. Sometimes it's hard to tell what a color really is until you touch it on this paper. I'm working from, I often say it, I work from dark to light in trees, and also I work cool to warm in trees. And I already have this cool slash warm layer in the trees because I chose to have a pink underpainting. So that is a warm layer. Then I, of course, applied the blue new pastel, which is a cool layer. So this is a little different underpainting for me that's not, necessarily my norm. And I love to experiment and try new things. I see something that inspires me. I think, I haven't done a monochromatic underpainting in a long time, or I haven't used pinks, or I haven't done this. And that's always just a fun time to experiment and play with our work. I've blocked in some greens with a Terry Ludwig pastel, and then this is a slightly, and I mean just a tiny bit lighter value. I often do that where I work almost like a ladder, and I've said this before and I'll say it again because this is something that's really important, especially when I first started painting. I didn't understand how to raise the value of your colors just ever so slightly as you want to increase and intensify the light. It is so much easier to apply a light pastel over a dark pastel than a dark pastel over light pastels. That's where I have found that you can really create mud. If you start darker and gradually get a little bit lighter as each pass, as your process through your painting, then you're going to have more success in basically emulating light in the landscape. The third part is we want to add the light right now without having the basics down. And so we have to be really patient to know that we're going to bring more light into our paintings. But we can't do it in too early, or we're going to mess up our values because we haven't allowed ourselves to formulate that darker, contrasted, darker value. But one of the most common questions that I get is about value and people not understanding value and how it relates to color. Those two things can be such a hard learning curve. But once you get it, it's like riding a bicycle. To see color as a value instead of just the hue that we're used to. If we can get the value right in the underpainting, no matter what color, if it's blue new pastel, or like in this case, I use that dark pink. If we can get the value in the underpainting process down, then that helps our ladder, because we have the base of the ladder, and all we have to do is move up it. We have to move up the ladder, up in lightness, especially on areas where we really want the sun to be shining, or we want to create a beautiful light in the landscape. Of course, blending them a little bit softly into the distance, pulling straight down, because I'm kind of wanting that green to pull down into these grasses that are at the forefront, because I want those to stand up a little taller since they're closer to us. I really don't have a lot of pastel in especially the foreground area. I kind of want to save that area for the final, all that light that I'm going to bring in. So I'm just going to put in my sky really quick. I'm experimenting here with, maybe I want to make this a softer, not put this blue sky in. I want it to be warm. Experimenting here. This is a light purple Richardson over that pink. I think I put a pink. That Rembrandt is actually the sky color. And using the edge of that pastel to define the edges of those trees, although I will lighten those edges, or at least tap on them to softly create that soft edge, because we want it to be receding into the distance. Okay, now one thing that I have noticed that I want to change about this piece is I'm going to add a little bit of blue in the distance on these trees. And I had some earlier and I think it got covered up. But what I'm looking at and why I'm making this change is because that foreground tree, the base, has blue in it, and yet it is not that same color, that same hue is not mimicked as we go back in the distance. And so the color temperatures weren't really reading as like they belonged in the same painting. So I wanted to add some blue, even though of course it's a much lighter, more desaturated blue than in the foreground where I'm working right now. And that way those elements go together and make sense in the painting. Sometimes we don't notice when something is like that. That is when I would suggest to my students to take a picture of your painting and look at it on your phone or on your desktop, your tablet, whatever you use to take photographs, and see what pops out to you, and really try to figure out why. Painting is problem solving. We're always trying to solve a problem of how to create something, a 3D world on a 2D piece of paper. How do we make it make sense to the people looking at our paintings? In this case, I wanted it to make a little bit more sense that this tree is towards the front. So I darkened that tree a little bit. I wanted it to contrast deeply with that second line of trees back there, and adding that darker edge improves that contrast and that value difference. I'm going to start adding in some grassy greens here in this forefront of this tree. How there's a little shadow that's peeking across, and using a very, very light touch, because I am using softer pastels in this area, and softer pastels, the Terry Ludwigs, the Great Americans, those Seleniae, Schminkies, all of those pastels are harder to make those linear lines in grasses. And so what you can do for grasses is you can scumble very lightly downwards, usually up and down. If it's a distant field, I go across, I go horizontally, because we can't see the sides of the grasses from a distance. Usually we're looking over the tops of grasses, so we don't need to be really up and down marks like I am right here in the foreground. I'm being much more linear, using a sharper, harder edge. I love to use new pastels for grasses. I like to use Giraud for grasses, sometimes Unison, because Unison is on the like they're soft, but more of a medium soft pastel. And so really it's just a pastel brand. I don't love to use the very, very soft pastels for grasses, just because, especially foreground grasses, because they just don't have that same effect, that linear quality that I love for grasses that are closest to the viewer. Usually when I'm wanting to really start adding light to the landscape is when I start adding my very, very warm greens or yellow. Filling in a little bit of these bare areas. I, of course, similarly, how I wanted to add that blue in the distance for the trees, and also that blue in the foreground of the big dark tree. I want to add golds. If they're in the distance, I want to add some of them in the foreground as well, so the painting has a cohesive color temperature throughout. You can really create some fun, grassy, wildflower effects with different mark making in your using your pastels. I love to put my pastel just on, especially like the Grumbacher, the vintage one that I love to use. I use it a lot for wildflowers. I just put the tip on it and I just roll that tip instead of trying to make a circle, or instead of trying to draw a flower. I just roll the pastel, and that really creates some kind of organic shapes and effects in the landscape. You can see right here, I just rolled the side of a pastel up to create linear lines that are really squiggly and organic. Right here, I'm kind of scumbling and tapping in a different yellow. This is a Terry Ludwig, but it's from the Umbers collection. So layering in not just your vibrant colors, but especially the more grayed, they will lend a much more nuanced mood to your paintings than just using those really deeply saturated pastels. Here's where I'm just going to really start being a little bit more careful, very directed about stepping back a lot. I mention that a lot whenever I'm talking to you guys. Step away from your paintings. If you don't know where to go, take a break from it and do something else for a while, and then come back to it and see what pops out to you as needing work or needing to be changed, or if something, one area you feel like, I could brighten that up a little bit. This distant tree back there, I'm going to add some warm green to it. I also kind of carved out with a slightly brighter value blue over that other blue that I used. Using that same warm greens to scumble in over these grasses. Right now I'm not making the marks like the linear marks. I'm just kind of filling in some of the areas that were still just underpainting. What I am loving about this piece is that far left corner where it's just the raw pink and the raw orange underpainting. I will often leave my edges completely raw because it creates a vignette effect that really spirals the eye of the viewer into the center of interest. This is a very, very light Rembrandt. Rembrandts and new pastels really are my favorite, and Giraud are my favorite for grasses. Continuing to add light, of just going up the scale, up the ladder, using the side of the pastel. Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you learned something. If you did, please give this a like. I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel and hit that little notification bell so you can be notified when I have a new video. I also have support levels over on Patreon. If you would like this free content to keep coming out, you can visit my Patreon channel at patreon.com/Bethany Fields. All the links are in the description. Thank you guys. See you soon.